have on our lives. So, I've heard it said like, hey, whether you're a biological mother or not a biological mother, it's like Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers, to all women, for the impact that you have on all of our lives. So Happy Mother's Day. So again, thank you for having us. I wasn't sure if anyone was going to show up. Rainy Mother's Day Sunday morning. So, but I appreciate your presence here today. I did type up notes last night and this morning. I emailed it to Tom about 45 minutes ago, and I said, does this look good? And he said, I think it has to look good, since we were pushed up against it. So, trying to act like a millennial and work off of my phone. So again, my name is Michael Kuhn. I am third generation funeral home owner for Kuhn Funeral Home in West Reading. Sound? Up a little bit? Okay. Good? Okay. Thank you, Crystal. Great. So again, I'm Michael Kuhn. I'm third generation funeral home owner operator. Many days it feels like I'm a little bit more of an operator than an owner. I do clean toilets literally every day. So I try to keep that entitlement out of the third generation ownership team. But I've been blessed to work with my father for 30 years. I've been in the business. I joined the family company in 1994. So, it's been an honor. And then the background on me: married, 3 kids, son 22. He's finishing up at Penn State. He's planning to join the family business, so we're looking at a 4th generation, which is super exciting. He's a great kid. Daughter that goes to college with Emily Shirk, Molly, at Drew University. And then I have a son, Brady, who's a junior at Wyomissing. So, blessed to have a great family. And real quick about my son, I sat down with my son before he was going to Penn State. Sunday before his senior year, second semester. He's on a 4.5-year plan, by the way. But I said, hey, I'm thinking I might need to hire someone else. How serious are you about joining the family business? And my wife and I were sitting down, and he was sitting down, and he said to me, he's like, well, if you'll have me, I'd like to try it. Yeah. And I was like, I almost cried on the spot. Because I think when you have a family business, the word that you want to avoid is entitlement. You just want to avoid entitlement, and you want hardworking people that are humble and hungry. And so anyway, I'm looking forward to having my son, and Tom's worked with my son a little bit, and so I'm excited to have a 4th generation, as is my father. Let's see, got these notes. So, quick framework around what I'm thinking that I'd like to talk about today. Sort of talked about our family business. Then I'd like to go over logistics, just sort of what happens when somebody dies. From there, talking about when you have a funeral, things that you want to look at in regards to our checklist, things of that nature, and then of course pre-planning. So, and Tom, did you bring any of those pre-planning booklets? Great. So we do have pre-planning booklets, but we're not handing them out, so you're forced to look at Tom and me when we speak. So whether or not that's a good decision or not, I'm not sure. Okay. So logistics. What happens when a death occurs, specifically with next steps? So first thing we like to tell people is when someone dies in the hospital, Reading Hospital, St. Joe's, Penn Med, whatever it might be, the hospital may say to next of kin, who's the funeral home? And you say, the funeral home is Kuhn Funeral Home or XYZ Funeral Home or whatever you say. And then there can be a misconception that the hospital calls us. The hospital does not call us. So family members need to call us, or sometimes people text these days. So people that I know are like, hey, my mom just died. What do we do now? But again, the hospital does not reach out to us. Nursing homes, they do call us directly, and then if someone dies at home, if it's a hospice situation, the hospice nurse will call us, and then we'll come to the house after the hospice does a check-in with the coroner's office. If it's an unexpected death, and I can have Tom talk about this just for a second from the police perspective, But if my wife wakes up and I died in my sleep at 10 o'clock last night, and it is clear that I have died, my wife should still call 911, so that, because there's no hospice here, and we got to make sure there's no foul play and all that kind of stuff. So 911 comes in, EMT, they'll come and pronounce. Police may come too if it's something more to that is going on. They'll call the coroner. The coroner usually will come to the home, and then we get called. Now, if you're not sure about any of that, you can call the funeral home and just say, my wife calls and says, hey, my husband died. Like, what do I do? And then we say, did you call 911? And then we can help facilitate that. But that's just the logistics with that first step of a death. So I know many of you have, obviously handled deaths in your family, but just talking about those specific situations. Tom, do you want to talk about any of that?
No, the coroner was here and kind of hit on that perspective.
Gotcha. Okay. Sorry, I was like, Tom, do you want to talk here? Question mark. Oh. So then the next big decision, and some of the stuff is super obvious, but it's also super critical, hypercritical to us and to you and to your family. It is, now we have the decedent in our care, and we talk about what are our next steps with the body. So, that's where pre-planning comes into play, where you say, I'd like to have cremation, or I'd like to have a full burial, or I'd like to have a viewing followed by cremation, or what have you. But it's very important, what are we going to do about the body? So you may say, hey, I want to be cremated, and I don't want anybody, I'm thinking I don't want anyone to see me again, and you don't communicate that to anyone. So if you don't communicate it with anyone, then the death occurs, and we're not sure what the plans are. And then, a daughter may say, well, I think mom said she wanted to be cremated, but she never really talked about it. And then we say, okay, now they're talking amongst the family, and we say, well, what do we want to do with next steps with the body? So does anyone want to come and see it? So let's say the family commits to, yes, let's do cremation, and we'll do a memorial service at Atonement. And then the question is, okay, does anybody want to see your mom again? So you can decline it. We used to make everyone identify, and we sort of moved away from that because not everybody wants to do it, but then they sign off. And then what do you want that to look like? So do you want to come in and have a little family viewing? Do you want to have your loved one dressed? If it's a woman, do you want to have her hair done or her nails done, unembalmed? But again, it's the last time you're going to see someone. And a lot of times it depends on, was somebody on hospice and was a lingering death, or did somebody die of a heart attack, and then you're like, oh, I just want to see my dad one more time. But we've learned over my 30 years the importance of having that conversation with every family about, okay, we've got the body. Now what do we want to do with the body? Even if it's just a simple cremation, who wants to see, your mom, your dad, your husband, your wife again? So we had a funeral last week. There were 2 kids. There was a surviving widow. It was a widow, rather. And then there were 6 or 7 grandchildren. And the kids and the wife were all like, oh, no, we're not going to see him again. And then I said, do you think any of the grandchildren would want to see him again? So he was actually embalmed, and he was going to be buried, but they were just going to have a closed casket service and then burial. And then they were like, we don't think so. And then they checked with the 7 grandkids, and the one grandson said, I definitely want to see my grandfather again. And so we met at the church early. The grandson came in early. He went up with a few of his cousins. They were up at the casket. They were embracing each other. They were crying. And then they came out. And then I talked to the primary players, and they're like, it's okay to close the casket now. But those are the little details that are so important that we need to make sure we follow through on, and that we're asking these questions with family. Because on a funeral, you don't get any do-overs. So it's got to be done right. So our checklist, we must have 45, 50 things on our checklist, super comprehensive. We're asking, do you want to do all of these things? So that's the body. Anything else I want to mention here? Yeah, I think I covered that. So, Tom, if there's anything you want to chime in on as I'm going.
Oh,
you good now?
I'm good now.
Okay. All right. So then we jump to services, and thinking about services, and just again making sure you're thinking about all of the things that are important to you and your family, so that the funeral feels the way you want your funeral to be like. Or when someone dies in your family and you're planning a funeral, you want that funeral to have a certain feel. And I've had families minimize, even this happened a couple months ago. There was like a full-fledged public service viewing, and then the kids pulled back on that and did just a private service at the funeral home, not at the church that was in the pre-plan, and they just brought everything back, and it was a sudden death, even though it was pre-planned. And that family really regretted their decision later. They're like, oh, we just were so emotional, and we thought the right thing was to just scale it back. And we wish we didn't do that. So again, the importance of thinking about every detail so that everything's done the way you think it should be done, so it's done appropriately. So basic questions. The obvious, I already mentioned cremation versus burial and all the options that there are with cremation, and I don't know that we even need to go into that right now. But with services, where do you want the services to be held? So atonement members, do you like to have the services here, Pastor Katie up at the pulpit, people giving eulogies, here in this setting versus at a funeral home where it's a little less formal? You get varied responses. Certainly if you're a churchgoer and you come often, I always think it makes sense to have it in the place where you worship. But again, that's your call. And then clergy, if it's here, it's Pastor Katie, but who is the clergy person? Music, what hymns you would want, readings, who would read in your family. I think the more to personalize services has a greater impact. So we had a funeral yesterday, and it was at St. Paul's Roman Catholic Church, and we didn't have a cantor, and because the church it was just one of those things. And I talked to the daughter afterwards, and she's like, I don't really care about a cantor and the music. She's like, we had the hymns that we wanted, we sang the hymns, the cantor didn't matter to her. So anyway, but those details, we sort of talked about, do you want a cantor? She wasn't super worried about it. But do you want Donna singing here? Do you just want Tom Yenser? Not just, he's amazing. Do you want Tom Yenser on the organ, and so on? Eulogy, who speaks? Do you want a eulogy? Not everybody wants a eulogy. Some people want to have it just kind of a tighter service. But of course, many people have eulogies, and again, that's personalization and telling that story. So you have a service here, and Pastor Katie knows a family member as a church member here at Atonement. Do you want a family member or 2 family members or 3 family members or sometimes 7 people and close friends where they give eulogies here and personalize things and memorialize the person? Webcasting. Some people, 2 reasons for webcasting. One, if families from out of town and they can't come in, they like to have the webcasting and view it either in real time, or if we webcast, it stays on our website for a month or 2, and then you can always purchase the webcasting later. The other reason you might choose webcasting is if you want to go back and look at, like, oh, my brother gave that eulogy at my dad's funeral, and I'm feeling I'm sort of beat up over it, and I want to watch it again. So I get feedback where people are like, I like to go back and watch the webcast and see my brother make those comments about my dad. It just makes me feel good. So that's webcasting. Little details. Pallbearers. Who would you want to serve as pallbearers? And some of this can be done in advance. Details like seating. So here's a quick example. When my wife's grandmother or grandfather, I can't remember, died, we were recently married, and I sat right here. And I was like, I should not be sitting right here. I just got married to Rachel, the granddaughter. But they just weren't super worried about it. But there are families that are like, I want to have my mom here, my brother Andy here, my brother David here, I'll be here, Ted will be here. And then the spouses will be behind. Or we'll say, my mom here, Ted, Jill, Mike, Rachel, Andy, so again, how specific do you want that? Because when you're in these seats, you want to be close to the people that are near and dear, and when you're crying and it's hard, like you want to feel that support and that physical contact and be able to reach out to the people that have your back and love you and are part of your nuclear family. So again, these are just like super in the weed details that many families say, oh, Michael, we don't care about that. I get that all the time. And then there's other families who are like, thanks for asking, we want seating like this. So that's our job, those kind of details. Slideshow, picture boards, framed photos, memorabilia on display, all those things. Luncheon, where do you want the luncheon? So people, like my grandmother, prearranged her funeral, and she's like, I want my funeral on a Saturday so everybody can be there, and I want the luncheon at the time was Viva, so we went to Viva. But she pre-planned that in advance, said, this is what I want. All the grandkids can make it on a Saturday. Of course, with sports, that's not always the case, is it? And then programs, memory cards, trifolds, all the card memorabilia, remembrances, headstone, final engraving, military honors, that type of thing. Tom, do you want to talk about military honors and first responders? We had a first responder funeral yesterday. Do you want to just talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So I've been very fortunate that Mr. Kuhn and Mike welcomed me into Kuhn Funeral Home when I retired, and I think it's just a great extension of what I did for this community, whether it's the church community or the borough community, for a lot of years. So I feel very honored to be here, so thank you, Mike. We're talking about first responders. I've kind of handled those that have come up, whether it be a veteran or a first responder. We handle it with complete dignity. It's one of our questions we ask when we first speak to the family if the person is a veteran, because our transfer team comes out already with a flag already prepared for that transfer into our care. So families are very touched by that, and the fact that we can even help with the family helps us in that transfer sometimes. It was one of the notes on there that I just kind of segue into quick, but we have the family members there help the transfer team from the funeral home as much as they want. Some people want to be able to help put the flag on. Some people want to help pull up the blanket before we exit the house. Some people want to help us carry out to the house, out to our vehicles. So I like to say there's nothing wrong in this business, because this is exactly set up for the way you want to honor your loved one and how we can assist you. The first responder ones that we have, you'll see on, that sometimes they make the news or on television. We help with the bugle, the military honors. One thing I would touch on real quick, and I know I was taking copious notes the past couple of weeks sitting back there with some things that I wanted Mike and I to touch on, because sometimes when you're looking for stuff after a death, like a DD-214 for the military people that I know there's quite a few here, if you don't have that, we can't get started on some of your benefits that you're entitled to. A flag, the honor guard, the military branch that you served in to be there. The time really is to look for those documents now. I just worked with a family, and it took about 2 weeks to get it, and that kind of just delays everything. So I mean, if there's anybody sitting there and you're wondering where yours is, kind of look for it now, and if not, let me know and I can help you. We can get that started. Because like I said, it took 2 weeks, and that just delays some things. You as a veteran are entitled to 10 death certificates from the Commonwealth. It takes about 7 to 10 days. Obviously, we can't pre-order those, but we can get a couple to start with and have those sent to us. So it's just those types of things. As much as we talked about conversations, whether it was with the coroner here or Dr. Lord talked about power of attorney or our financial planning, we have a booklet too that handles the funeral, and Mike hit on a bunch of stuff. Mike has a very comprehensive, copious sheet that we work with when we meet with a family for the first time, and it provides us a big healthy checklist, but it's also in this book that we're going to hand out, so you can sit down on your own and just pencil it in. And maybe it changes 2 weeks from now. You cross that off. I want to change it to this verse instead. It's all about planning, and this is just another level or another step in the process where planning is so vital. You want me to wait until we go to the next paragraph, or you want to?
I was sort of thinking maybe, what else were you thinking about?
Just, I think one of the big things when people come in to meet with us the first time is the fact that whether you wanted to have it be a graveside service, a funeral, of what you think of maybe people sitting in this room maybe with their grandparents, or a memorial service and leading into like a celebration of life. I think you see a lot more memorial leading into celebration of life, and people really embracing the fact of what that loved one had. And I think what Mike talked about, the webcasting, I think is a great idea. Because those conversations just don't come about. I know that there's one or two people here with my father passing away that thank goodness he could have that conversation with me about 3 days before, because I never heard him talk about cremation before. And he laid out very specific instructions to my brother and I what we were going to do. And I think when somebody dies very suddenly, you can't always get there. So that conversation is so important for this process. So important, because we've had just in my short time there, we've had some family dynamics that were very raw and very pretentious to each other in the funeral home. So I think the more conversation you have and everybody's on the same page, it's a much better situation.
Thanks, Tom. And I think sort of segueing into prearrangements, and we're talking a little bit about having difficult conversations. Difficult conversations are what? They're difficult. That's why they're called difficult conversations. But how do we feel after we have difficult conversations? We feel better. So having a difficult conversation is talking about our own death. That's not easy, but we're all going to do it. So it's best probably to talk about it and try to be a little comfortable about it. So, the idea of pre-planning, you're kind of like, I'm not sure I want to do that, but it just makes a lot of sense. Whether you prepay it or don't prepay it, we can dive into those details in a minute, but again, the idea of saying, this is what I want. And then what it does is it creates clarity for your survivors, which is so important. And survivors aren't saying, well, geez, I wonder what Dad wanted. So, I've met with my parents a few times reviewing their prearrangements. The last time I'm like, Dad, this is like our 4th meeting. And he's like, I know, but I want to make sure it's right. I'm like, okay, all right, I'm coming over. I'll see you Tuesday morning. I'll bring the coffee. But again, I just think the idea of doing that. And then just real quick in regards to if you choose to prepay or not prepay, totally up to you. If you do prepay, it locks in. We guarantee our goods and services so that you don't have to pay any additional money for the goods and services you select. So that's a pro. A con is you may say, well, I like investing in NVIDIA stock, and I'd rather make money in NVIDIA stock, and I'll have my estate pay for my funeral, which is also fine. So whatever works for you. Honestly, I just think the biggest thing is having that little bit of a difficult conversation about what's the method of disposition that you want, what do you want your funeral to feel like, create as much clarity as you can so that your survivors have that clarity and they're not guessing as to what it is that you want. So anyway, I guess questions? Yes, John. Organ donation. So I'm an organ donor, so I die today. They could harvest things from my body, and that would happen right away, as quickly as they can. So they would just need next of kin to say, yes, Mike was an organ donor. Yes, you can harvest organs. Sometimes it's just corneas, but other times it's long bones and internal organs. So it does happen as quickly as they can. They just need family consent, even if you sign off and say, yes, I'm an organ donor. Yes.
My wife and I are donating our bodies to anatomical study. What exactly is the process involved in that?
So anatomical gift registry out of Philadelphia is donating your body to science. Death occurs, you may or may not need a funeral home. So if you die, say Reading Hospital, they can do the transfer during the business week. If you're donating your body to science and you die on a Friday night at home, Humanity Gifts is not coming for you. So then you need a funeral home to do that initial transfer. Then we would hold the body and climate-controlled environment, which we have lots of capacity for. And then on Monday morning, we would do the transfer to Drexel here in Wyomissing, or go toward Philly, or sometimes to Hershey. So is that? Yeah. So after 2 years. Keep the body for 2 years on Topical Gift Registry. They keep the body for 2 years. Cremation afterwards. Cremated remains shipped to next of kin. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, Ken. Yes, thank you. That was on the administration side that I wrote down and didn't mention. So when we do the death certificate, and we next of kin has to sign off on the death certificate and say, yes, this is all correct. But it's now electronic, COVID-forced full electronic death certificate. So with that electronic death certificate, it automatically notifies Social Security, which kicks to Medicaid, Medicare. So it does come from us. And of course, we need the doctor to give us cause of death, and then we complete the data, and family signs off, and then we push to the state. We need a state worker to approve, takes a day or two, and then we have the death certificates ready, and Social Security is notified as soon as the person's full name, date of birth, Social Security number match up, and we press the button, Social Security is notified. So it's instantaneous.
What if you have no cemetery plot?
No cemetery plot, we talk about it. So we say, do you have an inclination to want to go to a certain cemetery that might be affiliated with a church? So you may say, I want to go to Haynes Church in Warnersville. Or many times people say, well, I'd like to have a cemetery that's close to my house or close to my kids. So we talk about that. But a lot of times we'll just give a bunch of different options. We can connect families with different cemetery folks, or they might just drive to a couple cemeteries and see which cemetery feels like most appropriate, and then we move fast. Yep. Yes.
Maybe Crystal would know.
Yep. I don't know that there's like a hard and fast. So what happens is the older you get, the question is organ donation. At what point do you age out? Sort of like, at what point do I age out of playing competitive sports? Well, it was a long time ago. So same question with, at what point are you sort of no longer an organ donor? I'm not sure. I don't have a magic number for the.
Let me add.
Oh, thank you.
It's very difficult. Typically what happens is you're in the hospital or the emergency room and things are going south. And you say, I'm over, my wife, or my husband, or whatever. The doctor then calls a special number. I used to work in a hospital. There was an organ donor number. And you call that specific number. And when I was up in Erie, it was set right down to Pittsburgh. And I would talk to a person in Pittsburgh, and they said, well, how old is this person? They would ask all sorts of medical information, what's their creatinine, kidney function, what's their heart function, how old, and so on and so on. So they go through a whole list, and then they say yes or no, this person doesn't qualify, or they do qualify. And then if you do qualify, well, I'll tell you, they send the helicopter, they send the surgeon, they send nurses, they send clergy, and it is absolutely amazing, how they can send people from Pittsburgh up to Erie to take care of that organ donor. But basically, it started as me, as a physician, calling that 800 number, and then they would go through a whole litany of questions. So that's how it works with a physician talking to the donor center. Does that answer your question? I have a question. Is there a time frame from the time you die until you have to be buried, if you're going to have burial? You have to be buried within a certain time.
You have to be buried within a certain number of days. Pennsylvania state law, you have 10 days to do a final disposition. That's cremation or or burial. If we're going to go longer than 10 days, and of course we dealt with a lot of this during the height of the pandemic, we would seek an extension from the State Board of Funeral Directors for that. As a matter of fact, at the height of COVID, they extended that to 30 days. So it's essentially a rubber stamp. We can say the decedent has been embalmed, there are grandchildren coming in from California, we're doing the funeral in 2 weeks, and is this permissible? And then they send a letter back and say, yes, it's permissible.
It remains to be sent cross-country. If somebody moved to California, they want to be buried in their home cemetery. Now, with family here, how do you send remains cross-country?
Yep, so we would just work with another funeral home. If we're going to do a traditional burial, there would be a local funeral home. If someone died in California, there would be a local funeral home, do the transfer, the embalming. We would arrange for the shipping of the body. We typically fly bodies into Philadelphia, and then we would go to Philadelphia, bring the decedent into our care, and plan. So we get a time frame from the other funeral home, and then we can start to plan for the service accordingly. Other questions? Is there anything else I had that you were going to talk about, Tom? Nope. Okay.
I don't know how many people have been through this, but this is going to be a very complicated issue. And my recommendation is, like I keep going back to Dan Kimball's very first law, is have the conversation. Find out what your family wants. Find out what your parents want, your spouse wants, and find out what they actually want. And then make the initial contact with the funeral home and go over this. It could be years ahead. You know, but the pre-planning is so valuable and so important because then you're not caught in a situation where you're trying to make decisions just like that because they have everything on the file. They know what the service will look like. They know what your options are going to be. And you have the documents in place. It makes it so much easier.
Peace of mind. You know, what allows you to sleep at night? So, you know, it's to me, life's all about that. It's like yesterday, Molly, my daughter drove in and clipped the side mirror, and she's like, I'm so sorry, I just broke the side mirror. I'm like, well, who cares? It's a side mirror. Let's go to bed. So, you know, but the same type of thing, having this difficult conversation, talking about these types of things, and then getting it done. And in the end, it gives you peace of mind, and then you're like, check, it's done. And, you know, last comment, you can go into super amounts of, lots of detail. There are people that type up their own obituaries. You know, so if my dad dies tomorrow, I'm one of 5 kids, some of my siblings are gonna be like, well, we have to tell the whole story about my dad in an obituary. And I'm gonna be like, well, not really. We can save that for the service. And my dad has his stuff, and like what he wants in his obituary is pretty short. So it's nice that he did it ahead of time. So again, that type of thing, and you can dive that deep into your pre-planning where you're like, hey, I want to pen my own obituary, and then it's there. It can get tweaked, but then it's just going to keep the guardrails in on my 5 kids who see things entirely differently from one another. Aligned, but see things entirely differently.